Thank you, Robin. Thanks to everybody. Again, thanks to Jessica and our friends here in Hamilton County. Cincinnati has been a great host city, and we loved it, so thanks a lot. So, I get to introduce our speaker today. First, I want to congratulate Jerry Paffendorf, who was married recently. It was a celebrity wedding in Upper Peninsula, Michigan. His partner, Mary, who has worked with it, was really the brains behind the operation, so Jerry made a very smart move. That way you can throw out the non-disclosure agreement, Jerry. Jerry's a fascinating guy. He is, I always wanted to be tall. Well, he's really tall. He's also tall and he's smart. And he has traveled the world. He's traveled, certainly traveled a lot of places in the country. He ended up in Detroit. Of all the glamorous places you've been, you ended up in Detroit. I don't understand that exactly. That's okay. We hope they're not in Cleveland. We're using it anyway. So anyway, I ended up there to where he built Loveland Technologies. And I think I really first got to know Jerry back in about 2012 or 13 when the city of Detroit, for the first time in its history, through Dan Gilbert and through Rock Ventures or Quicken, mapped every single property from the city of Detroit. About 275,000 parcels. Right? 360. So for the first time, Detroit knew exactly just how much trouble they were in. You know, it's a tough place, and Jerry did that. And that's when we became aware of his tool. We began to use him first in Cleveland, and now we've used him all over the state. We work with him in places like Akron and Dayton, and little cities like Oberlin and Lorraine and Elyria and Sandusky. We get calls all the time. We just got another call to continue to work with you, Jerry, in Sandusky. The city wants to re-engage you because they want a benchmark. They know where they were 4 years ago. They want to be able to see, I don't know if you know that, Scott, the city wants to do it again. They want some benchmarks to know where they were and how far they've come. So we love the product. We love the work. He is an energetic speaker. You'll learn a lot. And without further ado, Jerry Paffendorf.
Hey everybody. Does this work too? Hello. That's okay. I'll use this. I like to gesticulate, so I'll try to keep it just straight to the podium. So, how's everybody doing? Are you full? Your stomach's full?
Yes, we are.
Your brain's full? It's okay. I know how it is. So I'm going to keep this short and light and positive. How about that? So this will be fun. You're not going to be trapped in your seats here. So I want to open on gratitude and appreciation. So Jim mentioned we've been working in Ohio together with partners like Western Reserve for some years now, and there are a number of people in this room we've had the opportunity to work with in that time span. I'm going to talk about some of these projects. Briefly. I want to give support to some of the funders of our work in Ohio over the years. The J.P. Morgan Chase Foundation has been very helpful. I know that Quicken and Bedrock has been very helpful with some of the survey work that's happened in Cleveland and other places. And you guys, you probably know this, but sometimes it takes somebody a little bit from the outside to say this. Coming from Michigan, you guys have a really good thing going with the statewide Ohio Land Bank Network. You guys are all in the same room, you're all curious, you're all really good at what you do, you're also asking great questions, you're thinking about what you could do differently, and you all genuinely seem to like each other, at least for the most part, and that doesn't always happen. Doing work around the country, that doesn't always happen. So you've got a state with 88 counties and 50 plus land banks right now and growing. It's a phenomenal thing, and we have a lot of gratitude to be able to work with people in this room and learn from them. I do want to give a special shout out as somebody who works in the property mapping and data side. I want to give a special shout out to the people across Ohio who do the data work, who put data together, oftentimes the unsung heroes. So people like Mike Schramm and Neil Candu in the room, local folks in Cincinnati like Roger Pages. Ohio has a really good data ecosystem compared to other states, and I know it's always a challenge to do, and I'll talk about some of that, and it doesn't always get thanked as much as it should, but you guys are doing a really great job there as well. So for those who have heard of us before or know our work, you may not know we recently changed our website name from makeloveland.com to landgrid.com. And there's actually a Cincinnati-based and inspired story for this. This was a year or two ago. I was in town. I was with Will Basil from the port and Kathy Schwab from LISC Cincinnati. And they were introducing us to all these people and saying, tell them about your work, tell them what you guys can do together. And I hit upon this shorthand for describing our work, that what we do is we map the land grid. It makes us a little bit different from other things. We're not like a Google Maps. It's not quite like a Zillow. What we show you when you go to our website are the property boundaries of every single parcel of property in your community, with the address, the owner, the assessments, the tax values, building information. Whatever you have in your local county assessor's database, we put this in a map for you and show you that land grid. And I was, concurrently, I had a business meeting in Puerto Rico and I was meeting people, and I was giving the pitch about what we do. And someone I was talking to was so excited, they said, I want to pull this up on my phone right now. What's your website name? And I said, it's makeloveland.com. And they gave me a massive side eye, and they got very serious, and they said, the work you do is so important. This is so incredible. You need to have a great name that lets people know that you're also serious. And so I took that to heart, and I thought about it, and I thought about what we've dedicated ourselves to and the value that we provide, and we were very focused on making that land grid visible, because underlying everything we all do, it all ties back to this land grid of property, boundaries, ownership, control, taxes, permissions, redevelopment, all of it. And Ohio is a really interesting state to talk about the land grid in. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with this history. There's an amazing book about it that I can't recommend enough called Measuring America, which tells the story of the U.S. Public Land Survey. We laid out a square mile grid over almost the entirety of the United States of America, starting on the east side of Ohio, a little town called East Liverpool. So it's where Pennsylvania, Ohio, and that little tentacle of West Virginia all meet. Surveyors literally went out with 66-foot long chains, mathematical instruments that were new at the time to keep them on course. They drug their chains east to west and north to south. They created a square mile grid over the what's now the United States. And every 6 miles by 6 miles, that was a township. The townships snapped together into counties. The counties snapped together into states. And really what we're all doing right now, whether we think about it this way or not, is we're really all in the land grid business, because this was all laid out not that long ago. 1785, it sounds old to Americans. You go talk to Europeans, you talk to people in China, you talk to anybody else, none of this stuff is old at all. And I kind of feel like at a fundamental level, what land banks are doing is you're a phenomenon that comes from the fact that the original land grid that we laid down was built for a different time. We were rural and agrarian, we industrialized inside of this land grid, and now the population patterns have changed. The economy is different, where people live is different. And so land banks seem to emerge when we realize we need to be managing and treating the land grid differently. So maybe kind of a different way of looking at it, or a different concept, but I feel like that's where we are right now, is we're trying to help new life move through an old land grid. So property and data work, okay? So none of this kind of stuff that I'm going to talk about happens without other people and partners. I'll say, working on data, it's completely humbling because you never get it quite right. People get excited about all the things that you can do with data, but they always want it slightly different. There is one version of the world where somebody could have the perfect data set and the perfect tools that do everything for you. And of course, that's what everybody wants. You want the one thing that can do everything that you want done when you want it done. But the version of the world that we live in, that's not really the case. There's so many considerations and things that have to happen to make it work. You need political leaders to have the vision, get the buy-in. You need all the staff at our organizations need to turn the data into processes to get things done. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen at all. You need the foundational data providers, so the data that actually comes from within local governments that gets cleaned and made available that you can then piece together in different ways to use. You need other software. There's no one software that works. People love spreadsheets. Everything's going to become a spreadsheet at one point. People want to do different kinds of mapping. Sometimes they want points, they want parcels and points, they want one or the other. So you find yourself in a situation where you're piecing things together to make processes work. Of course, you need funders. So you've got to convince funders that this work is worth doing, and get the resources together to do it. And then after all that has to work to help the person on the street who's actually doing the job get the thing done, who wasn't a part of your big idea for how to do all of this. So, but what does it mean when you get it right? If you get it right, if you do data right, if you have the right systems in place, I don't know if we talk enough about this as like the value proposition, but you get happier. You literally get happier at work because when people ask you basic questions you feel like you should know, what's going on with your properties, which properties do you own, what's at risk of this or that, you can actually start to answer those questions. And then importantly, it makes it easier to go out and raise money because you can quantify the scale of the task that you need to accomplish. And you can start to put dollars to that, and you can explain to people what it's going to take to get that job done, and then show that you can track how you spend it. It also increases trust from your community. Okay, this is a really big thing. Okay, so look, this is a Detroit experience we have. There's not always a lot of trust in the city. Like, what does the city know? Why don't you tell us what you know? And I feel like most people want to tell people what they know. They just have a hard time delivering the data to them in a way that can be shared. But when you do that, you can move conversations in your communities forward, because even if you're not perfect in what you know, and even if you don't have an approach that they exactly agree in, you can both be on the same page when you have good data, so the trust goes up, and you can agree on the actions that need to be taken, and the results can be measured. So with the remainder of this talk, I really have two goals. Okay, this is easy. There's not, I'm going to share some stories. I want to share stories from a variety of land banks and organizations that we've worked with. These are short stories, and these are little vignettes. A lot of them take place in Ohio. Some of them take place in other states. And the reason I chose them is because some of them are small, some of them are big, they have different flavors, and I'm hoping that the people in this room, when you think about your organization and community and what you want to accomplish, they could trigger something in you, like, oh, that would be helpful to me, or I could do something that they did, or that's a tool that I could use. And I want to make explicit an invitation for you to talk to me and our team. And so at this table up front, I have my colleagues, Mary, who's the one that we were recently married. Thank you, Jim, for pointing that out. Krista and Nick. And the only reason I feel like this is even worth underlining is I feel like sometimes in my talks and presentations, somebody says something that's like interesting and relates to you, you're not really sure if like they actually want to talk to you. Is this like something like, what I want to do, would that really apply to you? We have oriented our entire organization to help solve problems relating to data and the land grid for organizations of all sizes. So if you're a small land bank or a small group or you don't have a budget, please don't be shy. Come and talk to us and we'll figure out a way to be of assistance. So as a very quick prelude, what is this landgrid.com thing if you're not familiar with it? Well, it's a website. We try to be your go-to source for all things parcel data. If you ever need property boundaries, ownership, assessment data, you can go to this website and you can probably find it, or you can find enough to start with, because our team has spent the last 5 years assembling a huge nationwide data set of 145 million plus property boundaries that cover about 95% of the US population. This is its own conversation to be had. I'm not going to belabor it. It's a really weird thing that we were able to do this. There's a couple of companies that do this. They're multi-billion-dollar companies. We're a team of 12 that's just stuck to our knitting on how to do this. And so every county that's green on here is a county that we have base parcel data for. And we currently have base parcel data in every Ohio county except for 2. And we'll work on that when it's comfortable. So you can rest assured that you're basically going to find your community already online on this website with some basic level property boundaries, ownership, assessments, etc. So we also provide software for working with this parcel data. So when you go to your community, you can do things like filter your view to highlight top owners, or find properties that were built in a certain year, or behind on their property taxes, or have a certain zoning type. And we have tools for styling and color coding, and basically like your own little user-friendly GIS system that you don't have to be a total wizard to be able to use. And then when you want more data inside of the system, if you have your own existing data sets, or if you want to take data out, we make it really easy to add your own data or pull everything down as a spreadsheet. So we try to make the system adaptable, knowing there's no end to the amount of data that exists in the world. And then the third thing we do, it's a very common use, something we get involved in all the time, is using the software to actually go out into your communities and collect data. So we have a mobile application, lets you create your own questions, any kind of questions you want to answer. So we do a lot of property condition and assessment surveys. We do door-to-door, door knocking and interview campaigns. Code enforcement departments use this. You can make up any question tree that you want to, and then literally go out yourself or send your staff out into the field to visit either particular properties or every property, and then quickly tap through a menu, take pictures, and have it all load neatly in your map. Okay, so that's kind of the prelude of what's in the scope of what we provide. And I do have what I think is an exciting announcement for this room to make as far as data goes. We've been wrestling with this for a long time, and we're finally able to get into shape nationwide vacancy data from the US Postal Service. So some communities may have used this locally previously, but essentially, as mail carriers go out and drop off mail every day, they make a note if a property is vacant and not receiving mail. And this gets updated every couple of months. And so we've been able to attach a vacancy flag to every single parcel in Ohio where that's the case. So there's a little over 6 million parcels in the state. And I think the number that we found on there is a little over 90,000 vacant residential houses across the state. And if you go down to your community, you'll be able to get an out-of-the-box assessment of how much vacancy there's likely to be. Okay, so this is something that you guys can all find right now, and we're really excited to make this available to land banks because it's a jump start on understanding vacancy, and it can be a jump start to going out and assessing those vacant properties to find out if they're vacant but in good condition, or if they're really a dilapidated house that probably nobody's coming back to. We also just put out on the site nationwide building footprints. Actually, they're up for Ohio right now, so this is statewide. In addition to the parcel, we did a partnership with a data provider where you can also see the individual boundaries, the outlines of every single building. So it's the building footprints within the parcel, which can be helpful for understanding what exactly is on a property, in addition to turning on the aerial imagery. So some short stories from a range of projects that I hope that you'll see yourselves in and get inspired by. So we've done a lot of work with Jim in Cleveland in the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. We've done citywide surveys. We did, Jim and his team have done something that I think is so important for people to plan for, to make the data really work, which is to keep the data work going over time. Okay, so in 2015, there was the citywide survey of Cleveland done. In 2018, just last year, there was a big resurvey of many neighborhoods on the east side of Cleveland, and the data was put together to see what had changed over time. So if we're doing demolition, if we're doing rehab, if we're doing different programs, let's actually go back and look at what change is taking place. Are we getting the results that we want? If things aren't working for whatever reason, what else might we have to do to make that change? And so I want to highlight the power and the ability to do that, to do these surveys and then to go back out to see the difference over time, change over time. A project that we worked on in Cincinnati with LISC and a whole host of other local partners, they basically want to take an inventory of all the vacant residential structures in Cincinnati and find out which ones appear to be close to move-in ready or could be move-in ready with some work done to them. And then do some analysis where they look at property owners so they can understand who do we actually have to reach out to in order to get permission to make this house available for a family or an individual to move into affordably. And in this case, they didn't need to go out and look at every single parcel in Cincinnati. They were really interested in residential, and they were really interested in vacant residential. So what they did in this case is they took that US Postal Service vacancy data as their starting point, and they used that to identify everything vacant and residential, and canvassers went out and they looked at only those properties. And they're doing analysis with it now to figure out who are the top owners of these properties, who could we get in touch with to make something happen here. So really powerful, really kind of like an overwhelming sounding project to do, but when you use data to narrow the scope, you can knock that out in days and weeks, not years, and not for lots and lots of money. Here in Cincinnati, and this is something that we're working with Will and a team of partners on here, there's a data sharing of Cincinnati Data Hub, a portal that's going to share data between the port and the Hamilton County Land Bank and other partners. So when the land bank and other partners have data sets that they want to share with people that they're working on projects with, a really easy way to have their own view of the data and then to swap stuff back and forth, and then also to make stuff available to the public. You want to flip a data set over to the public, you can do that. Boom. Now residents can take a look at that information. David Mann and team, Lucas County Land Bank, they use the LandGrid software for property data management. So they load their data, the land bank data, other data from the county, into an interface where they go through and as properties change and sales happen and things update, we help them keep that information updated so they have their source of truth. And then they also use it to periodically go out and do property surveys and inventories as well. And it's Ian Beniston from Youngstown. No, I threw him in here because right before this conference, I gave Ian a call. He's a friend. He works at the Youngstown Neighborhood Development Corporation. Not a land bank per se, but I asked him if he was going to be here. And I also said, like, forgive me, like, I have a hard time keeping track. Are you guys still using our software at all? And I asked him in like a way where I was like, it's okay if you're not. Like, if you found a better way to do it, I won't be upset. And he was like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, we just finished the citywide housing survey in Youngstown, like recently. We use LandGrid every day. And I was like, oh, thank God. I don't have a full slide for you, but I can throw you on top of it. So thanks for being good sports on that one. Yeah. So a project not in Ohio, got just a couple that are outside of Ohio that I'm very proud of, and I think that could be very helpful here in certain cases. So we work very closely with the city of Flint, Michigan, and the Genesee County Land Bank. And they have just a wonderful website that we put together with them. It's at flintpropertyportal.com. It's completely branded for the city and the county and their programs. And what we've set up with them is that they had a number of data sets that they wanted to make easily available to the public and other governmental departments. So these are things like demolition statuses, which properties have been demolished, which ones are in the pipeline to be demolished, properties that the land bank is currently selling. So if somebody wants to come to their site and see, like, what can I invest in from the land bank, you just press a button and you can turn that on. Publicly owned properties, future land use planning so that people can be informed. We're thinking of changing zoning here or there. And they also figured out a pretty ingenious way, I think, to keep a property survey constantly updated, which is they have just a couple people on their code enforcement team that are tasked every day to go out, photograph, and update information about a handful of properties across the city. And it creates this stream on the site where there's a constant Twitter-like feed of new property, occupancy, and condition information. And over the course of months, just a couple of people who were on city staff are able to keep the entire city of Flint's property condition survey updated. And I thought they really showcased bringing together a clever combination of a number of things that I had talked about. Nice branded site for the land bank in the city, live data feeds with some easy to press buttons to pull up things that people are commonly interested in, and then a way to actually keep the survey updated on a rolling basis. And we were just in Flint sitting down with the team just earlier this week, and it was another one of these situations where you never quite know. You're like, you guys okay? Are you happy? And you're always kind of expecting them to be like, it's okay, you know? And the feedback that we got there, they were like, look, every neighborhood meeting we have right now, people are pulling this up on their phones, they're pulling it up on their laptops, they're pointing out certain properties, the mayor uses it, all these people use it, like, how can we do more? You know, how can we put more property data, more development data, how can we have different themed things? And so it's very heartening to see it having a real impact in places that often are strapped for cash and trying to figure out how to do more with less, trying to gain trust, trying to raise funds, and trying to do a good job. And then two more real quick. So this one I think is interesting. I think that Nigel and the Dynamo team left, but I do want to talk a little bit about how the data can be used, not just to have the data, but you can put it into different kinds of analysis. So last year we did a citywide survey with the Hartford Land Bank in Connecticut, new land bank that just started at the end of last year. We did a citywide survey with them, so they hired local youths, went out with the surveying app, visited every property in Hartford, and now Alan Malik from the Center for Community Progress is using that as a major input into a market analysis that will help them decipher, I believe, both where investments are likely to have the greatest impact, but then also be careful to keep investing in places where the data may not say it's the best place to maximize a dollar, but you're doing a good job taking care of the whole of your community. And that kind of stuff is great because you can use these data outputs to do these bigger reports, these bigger assessments, these bigger analysis. What's going to happen if we do this, then this is likely to happen. And then one that I'm just super proud of, we actually have a number of these. Krista's got them, she's holding them up. This is a report that is near and dear to our hearts because a big reason we got into this line of work in Detroit was just seeing the devastation in the city. What happens when you have 2 million people in 1950 and you have less than 700,000 today? You get a lot of vacant buildings, you get a diminished tax base, you get a city that struggles to take care of itself. And when we were hired by the White House and a number of other partners, Dan Gilbert, a local blight task force, to lead this visitation of every single property in Detroit to assess blight, the key finding we had, and I love this because when you get the data, you don't always know what you're going to find, right? Like, is not data for data's sake, but when you look at the data, you learn things from it. And we saw something like a greater than 80% correlation with blighted, damaged buildings in the city and our local tax foreclosure process. This is definitely a whole other story I'm not going to get far into, okay? But we have a very strict tax foreclosure law in Michigan. Detroit has tax foreclosed on more than 50,000 occupied homes in about the last 10 years. A lot of it very recently, a lot of it since the bankruptcy. And when you foreclose on these homes and just auction them, people leave their homes, or they get evicted, right? You leave because you're not the owner anymore, the new owner might raise the rent on you, you just feel uncomfortable with the whole situation, or you get the eviction. And so tax foreclosure really is the pipeline of blight in Detroit. Causation, correlation, whichever one it is, if you're not tracking that and trying to keep people in homes, it doesn't matter how many buildings you tear down. There are going to be more vacant properties to take their place. And so the approach we took here, knowing that, was to get people together from neighborhoods across the city, and rather than just go out and assess the condition of the property itself, they were armed with the knowledge of every single home in Detroit that was behind on its property taxes and at risk of going into tax foreclosure. So these residents went and door knocked on about 60,000 houses. They were trained by local housing counselors how to approach the occupant, what programs would apply to the occupant, optional interview. They asked people things like, did you know this property was at risk of tax foreclosure? And they tried to catch this early. Okay? They tried to turn it into a problem where, rather than trying to save people right before it's supposed to go to auction, this was trying to reach everybody who was just a year delinquent right now. Right? Still time to do something. Ask the person, did you know this was the case? Do you mind if I ask you, what's your relationship to the property? Are you the owner, are you a renter, are you a family member, some other kind of situation? And then ask, do you think if any of these programs, do any of these programs apply to you? In Detroit, we actually have it's called a poverty tax exemption. If you make less than a certain amount, you don't pay property taxes at all. And the city was sued by the ACLU a couple of years ago for this because while this program exists, it's not advertised and it's not easy to apply for or get. And it so turns out that if people did apply for this, it would have cut out almost all of those occupied foreclosures that were sent to the auction. So the counselors were trained to provide this information and ask how many people were eligible for this, can we help you apply, things of this nature. And so all these results, obviously a lot of the information is very personal, requires a lot of trust, but the results, the aggregate results of the different situations people were in were shared in this report. And this is also, it's at foreclosureoutreach.org is the website where you can find it. And I'm so proud of this one because it was taking data to identify a real problem that if you didn't identify it, all of your other efforts, the demolitions were going to be, they need something, right? But if you're tearing down 20,000 houses and 20,000 more houses go vacant, that's not a good place to be. So then focus on this and then bring the human element into the property surveying as well, using neighbors who know the neighborhood, who have trust, and then having really good data security with good partners. And I feel like this is something that could be replicated in other situations, even if the flavor is a little bit different, because it is possible to knock on a door and talk to somebody, right? And sometimes that's where the best information comes from. So I say all that, there's no reason to talk through or read through this. It's just interesting that when we do this data work that all ties back to the land grid, it ends up taking out a whole bunch of different flavors. And we end up working on projects sometimes that are big and they cover multiple states, and sometimes we just work with an organization or a block club or a community group that might have 1 or 4 people that work there. And we try to make these things applicable in either of those scales. Something that may be interesting, while we try to build as many features to be helpful into our software as possible, one thing we've noticed over the last year, which is interesting, and that we love doing, is that there's no end to the applications, like software focused on helping solve a particular problem or assist a particular process or get something done. So we have a really easy way to share the data we have with software developers who want to build their own apps with the data. And that's been really exciting. That's really helped our business grow to the point where we can spend more time with people who don't have large budgets as well, frankly. So there's a number of examples on our sites of people who, like the screenshot on here right now says, random but awesome. It's a company called Woods Camp, which was acquired by the National Forestry Association, and they use the parcel data to help people who privately own forested land understand what kind of trees are on the forest and what options are available to them to put it into a conservancy or do sustainable logging. It's something I never ever would have thought of, right? But just an application that ties back to the land grid that once people have the data, they can build whole different things other than just property surveying. So as I start to dismount on this, and lead you on your way, I do want to talk about think a little bit about the future. All this data stuff now, I feel like over the last 5 years, we've kind of moved to a point of like needing to educate people about like, digital data at all and some of the things you can do, to a point where there's actually a lot of capacity, and it kind of blows my mind the things that can be done with data that might not be fully obvious. And as I was thinking about this talk, it reminded me of this principle. And I think this is like a 1960s thing. Marshall McLuhan was this media theorist. Might be the first Marshall McLuhan reference at a land bank conference. I don't know, possibly. Second, yeah. I missed the morning session, James. Yeah. So his basic principle was anytime you have a new medium, the first thing you do with it is you impersonate the previous medium, because that's what you know. You put all your processes through the new medium. And so like a famous example of this, very straightforward example, is when you invent the motion picture camera, right? You can now do film, you can capture the world in motion. People have genius ideas like, let's film a play, right? Like, let's capture like the thing that we had to do previously to like watch human drama unfold in a space. And it takes a while to develop this new language of cinema, which says like, okay, well we can cut scenes, use camera pans, you can add music, you can actually wait for a season to change, you kind of figure out the length that people will tolerate, like a story in a motion picture. And I feel like there's a lot to still get our minds around when it comes to working with the land grid and using data, because right now, understandably, we're still like, okay, so the world we're used to is kind of paper plat maps, and there's very specific functions that were kind of based on what you would do with paperwork. And so the digital tools will help us do all those things faster, and we might be missing out. Like our imaginations aren't totally primed for bigger opportunities. And so I'll share one, because this is something that I really feel like could be coming up fairly quickly, and we're doing some experiments with, and it kind of blows my mind. Some people may be familiar with the term machine learning. If not, it's like a fancy-ish way of saying kind of artificial intelligence stuff. It's not really that the computer's smart, but you can basically train software to try to identify patterns and things. And some of the work that's happening right now, where you take high-resolution imagery, and we are in a world right now where, aside from Google Maps and Google Earth, there are companies that take phenomenally detailed imagery of the planet, really, on a regular basis, that's startlingly high resolution sometimes. We were on a call with a provider the other day. She zoomed in on her house and she pointed out like the plastic fork on her styrofoam plate that she had left on her picnic table. And she was like, I apologize, my chairs are a mess. And I actually asked her, I asked her that medium question. I was like, this is really cool. It's like, what are we all doing though? Like honestly, like it's cool. Like maybe we figure out like the business relationship. What are we actually doing? This is wild. Like this is where we are as a planet. Like this can be known. So anyway, it's kind of mind-bending, but more to the point, we're now in a place where the kinds of property surveys that happen in person, where a canvasser goes out and they like use their eyes and they squint at a house and they say, okay, it's a duplex, it's it's a C-grade condition, it's got a blue tarp on the roof, like it looks possibly occupied, lawn's overgrown. Answering questions like that can be greatly assisted and automated by a machine learning system, where you basically take the parcel boundary as the picture frame, so to speak. You put the super high resolution imagery into that picture frame, and you tell the computer things about the property. And it could be anything you want, honestly. It's like, does it have an impervious surface? Like, is there chimney damage? Like, is it a junkyard? Is it a swimming pool? Is it whatever? And then you can run that analysis across just massive amounts of space. So Ohio has 6 million different parcels. That means Ohio basically has 6 million different pictures of the land grid, if that makes sense. It's got 6 million different pictures to understand. You spend a little time training a system like that, and you could learn more about the space of Ohio than you might ever want to know. And I only say that because I don't know exactly what to do with that right now. I just know that it's possible to do. It's an interesting, ambitious statewide project to do. It could mean that, I'll say 3 land bank conferences from now, all of a sudden everyone's having a very different conversation because you're all staring at a fully quantified map of the state, every single vacant property in the state, every single piece of deferred maintenance in the state, every single commercial property in the state, the ability to see one property you're interested in and say, show me every other property in the state like that, and then actually be able to know it's kind of mind-blowing. But that's the world that we're entering into, and I hope that's not too much from outer space, because as I was putting this together, I was like, I want to make this like approachable. Anybody can do this, but I also want to let people know that all of this is in motion, and there's a lot of crazy stuff that's like coming up that you can do. So I wanted to share that, and then maybe more down to earth as a statewide thing. We assemble parcels from all over the country, like I said, so we get to understand how different states do things differently. Every green county on here is a county that we currently have some data for. Another thing for Ohio to be proud of why you're better than Michigan in many, many ways is Michigan has really, really bad access to parcel data. It's a very greedy environment. You know, they're like, we'll give it to you for $80,000 if you want it. And I don't think it does Michigan any favors. It's not the communities that are like that are not necessarily the healthiest communities on earth. But we also see how states are starting to do more collective data sharing. So like if you look on here, Kentucky's another example. Kentucky's a tough state. Kentucky did not have that land grid that I talked about. They opted for a different system, and it kind of confused everything. The states like Wisconsin, Indiana, they all have state-level programs where every county puts their data together and shares it at the state level. And you know, from the point of view of a company like ours that tries to like piece all this data together, and from the point of view all as statewide practitioners, there's a real opportunity for Ohio to be a leader, to follow quickly with these other leaders, to have a beautiful, standardized, statewide data available. You guys are very close to it right now. Because like I said, every county other than 2 already makes this stuff available in its own silo. And that would be a phenomenal thing. It could be a thing for the Land Bank Association to think about. Certainly not the only thing, but you guys have so many members right now that cover the state. What are the opportunities to move the whole state forward in different ways? And so with that, I do think we're all in the land grid business. It might be a different perspective on how to look at this, but we're all trying to push new life in a healthy, productive, fair, equitable way through a grid that was laid down for the most part more than 200 years ago. And if we can become conscious of that and how much our work ties back to that grid, maybe we can do a better job and have more fun shaping it into the future. So please don't be shy, get in touch with us. We're at the table right here. We love working in Ohio. And with that, I don't know if I should take any questions or if I should just say, go have fun, enjoy that last session, and we appreciate you. Oh, the raffle. Yeah, how can I forget? Yeah, the raffle. You got what do you got, an iPad and a Kindle?
Fire Kindles with case.
Okay, so thank you very much.